The recent elections showed democracy in distress in this country. Young people feel disconnected, disengaged with what is happening in the political scene. No country can develop itself without having the voices of communities being heard, without having the voices of civil society there. And that is why we don't hear civil society anymore. The recent elections showed democracy in distress in this country. It occurred in a very restrictive environment with large numbers of political activists, political leaders put in prison. There was voter intimidation, electoral irregularities, political violence. Even more importantly, prior to the elections, for months and weeks, even years ahead, there has been institutional capture by the ruling party, judicial harassment of journalists, human rights activists, and others, which created an environment in which the elections could not have been fair and free. And of course, the boycott of the political opposition kind of sealed the fate of the election. Everyone knew what the results were going to be, and as a result of that, a lot of people felt they had no choice and didn't turn up. So that's not what one would call the kind of election that an emerging democracy should have. Participatory, free and fair election is that it engages the electorate with the representatives. Democracy, one of the key characteristics of a democracy is representatives elected by the people. That's missing. And that means that the development that this country wants to enjoy is going to be marred by lack of political participation. If you don't hear diverse voices, if you don't invite your people to participate through elections in public affairs, then you are missing out a huge element that is important for successful, sustainable development. Well, one of the tragedies of this election, I would say, is that not only was there very low voter turnout, which basically a message to the government that our vote doesn't count, you're not listening to us, but there was even lower turnout of young people. Young people feel disconnected, disengaged with what is happening in the political scene. The younger generation is, of course, from where leaders will be coming, the future leaders. When they tune out, that basically means that the space for political participation shrinks, and it's a very bad signal. What's happening with young people? They're leaving the country in droves. The better educated ones are going out whenever there is a good opportunity. The poorer ones are paying traffickers and others to take the boats and go to better economic markets to provide the labor in better economic markets. In both ways, the country is losing from the top and the bottom. The talent pool is shrinking. The country is really losing the lifeblood of its society. That is something that I think the government needs to take into account very, very seriously. Unfortunately, from the perspective of my mandate as the UN's independent expert on freedom of expression, I am deeply concerned about the restrictive space for expressing dissent, for expressing diversity of views. The government used for years the Digital Security Act as a threat to shut down any criticism, to lock people up. People even died, as you know, while being detained in prison awaiting charges for even the mildest of criticism, mildest of difference of views. There are 5,600 cases still pending under the Digital Security Act. The government repealed the act and introduced a Cyber Security Act, but it is very largely the same as the DSA was. So what these legislations do, they don't only stop one person from speaking out, the person who's charged, they actually have a chilling effect where a lot of others desist from expressing their views. So you get a society where people are afraid to speak their mind. You don't have diversity of views, you don't hear what others are saying. The quality of your decision making as a policymaker, as a government official, suffers as a result of that. And of course, people are very frustrated. Right now, the country has huge economic problems. The country has huge social problems that have to be resolved. And the elections did not provide an avenue for representative participation in this decision making. People are angry. They want their voices to be heard. So if you shut down, if the government shuts down all avenues of dissent, I think they're creating an explosive situation. Well, the UN's message is quite straightforward, and one, of course, which I, as an independent expert, endorse. And the message is, the elections have occurred, a government is now going to be sworn into power, and it is the responsibility of that government now to investigate the human rights violations that have taken place in recent months and weeks in connection with the election and other human rights violations, and to shift, the government must shift its position on human rights and uphold the obligations that the state of Bangladesh has accepted willingly. Human rights principles and obligations are not an imposition from outside. These are obligations that Bangladesh has accepted, and Bangladesh must now live up to it. It is in the interest of this government, it is in the interest of the country. Well, the denial, of course, of something does not mean that it doesn't exist. So I would first say that the government should make a reality check, an honest check of where it has failed in its obligations for human rights. One of the key areas that I see is the independence of the judiciary, the rule of law. Without the rule of law, no country can achieve effective economic development. No country can create public trust in the government. And of course, injustice will breed frustration in the population. So I would suggest that the government take a good hard look at how the judiciary is being weaponized against human rights activists, against political opponents, against anyone, in fact, against journalists, against anyone who wishes to speak truth to power. I would also then look at key institutions such as law enforcement, such as economic institutions that need to be independent of the government of the day, independent of the ruling party, to make some tough decisions. So I would really think that the government needs to focus on the rule of law. The government needs to focus on providing economic and social rights through appropriate institutions. Government needs to protect media. Media play a very important role in emerging democracies, indeed in any society, and media has effectively been silenced. There are only very few brave editors and journalists today in Bangladesh who are writing as they see things. And I think the government needs to look hard and recognize the important role that media plays, and then civil society. Civil society has a role to play. In this country, of all the countries, we know the role that civil society, that ordinary people, that communities have played to rebuild the country from the ground up after 1971. The role that they played in the freedom movement, the role that they played again in overthrowing the military government, the role that they play every day in making changes at the level of the community and in drawing attention of the authorities to what is going wrong. And civil society needs to be strengthened and respected for the role that they play. Well, if you go back and look at the history of this country over the last 50 to 72 years, you think of the language movement in the 1950s. Think of the role that the students played at that time that is now recognized the world over the mother tongue, the value of the mother tongue. That kind of movement, social movement, has been beaten down over the years because of the approach that the government has taken, this government and governments before it have taken to any form of dissent, the restrictions that have been put on financial funding of civil society, particularly of human rights organizations. Yes, there are health organizations and other types of social organizations, but any organization that is seeking to make transformative change is being seen as a threat. That has weakened civil society. We've seen civil society leaders attacked, harassed, human rights defenders harassed, and many of them have left the country, many of them are hiding, many of them have decided to retire and shut up rather than endanger themselves or their families. And that is a big loss. No country can develop itself without having the voices of communities being heard, without having the voices of civil society there. And that is why we don't hear civil society anymore. I think there the government may have done a disservice, I think, to the country and to itself.